Michael Jordan calls for NASCAR to change the sponsorship model. Matt Kenseth is going to race in the SRX, and NASCAR is talking about lengthening practice sessions. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to another video. We've got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories sketched here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to start off with paint schemes and sponsorship news. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is Kyle Busch's 2022 JBL scheme that we're going to see this season in the Truck Series. I like this paint scheme a lot, very similar to Corey Hines' scheme. Not much change over the last couple of years, but you really don't have to change the scheme, so I think it's a nice looking paint scheme, and I'm looking forward to see on the racetrack this weekend at Las Vegas. Next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Landon Castle's 2022 Storm X scheme that we're going to see this season. I like this paint scheme a lot. I love the pink on the car. I'm not always a big fan of pink schemes, but this one is an exception. They did a really great job on this paint scheme. It's a nice looking scheme, and I'm looking forward to see this on the racetrack throughout the season. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Josh Williams' 2022 Silverton Casino scheme that we're going to see this weekend at Las Vegas. They did a really good job on this paint scheme, in my opinion. It's a nice looking scheme, and it's great to see that Silverton Casino is going to be sponsoring Josh Williams this weekend. It's a good paint scheme, in my opinion. Next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Brandon Jones' 2022 Barracuda Pumps Menard scheme that we're going to see this weekend at Las Vegas. Not much to say here. It's very similar to other Brandon Jones schemes. The Menards, of course, has sponsored Brandon Jones all season. Not much has changed here, but it's a good looking paint scheme. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Kyle Busch's 2022 Ethel scheme that we're going to see at Las Vegas in the Cup Series. I love this paint scheme a lot. They did a great job on it. It's very similar to last year's scheme, except the numbers moved forward, but nothing as much changed, which is a great thing. I think they did a great job on it. It's a really good sponsorization as well. And I hope Ethel gets to sponsor a lot more races for Kyle Busch because this paint scheme looks incredible. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Chase Purdy's 2022 Bama Buggy scheme that we're going to see in 2022, including this weekend at Las Vegas. I actually think this paint scheme is pretty cool. I'm not a big fan of the blue number. I wish that number was white or black or something else. I don't really like the blue number, but everything else about this car, I actually like. They actually did a pretty good job on this paint scheme. It looks pretty cool, and I'm looking forward to see us on the racetrack this weekend at Las Vegas. Next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Thad Moffitt's 2022 Clean Harbor scheme that we're going to see for a couple races in 2022 in the Truck Series, including this weekend at Las Vegas. I love this paint scheme. Colors work very well on this car. The white number is really cool. And it's great to see that, of course, I mean, I have my own opinions on Thad Moffitt, but it's really cool to see it's very similar to his other Clean Harbor schemes. It's a good looking paint scheme, in my opinion, and I'm looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend at Las Vegas and a couple other races. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ryan Preece's 2022 United Rental scheme that we're going to see for the 3 truck races in 2022. I love this paint scheme, and great to see the United Rentals stepping up to sponsor Ryan Preece. Love this a lot. Not much to say here. They did a good job on it, and I'm looking forward to seeing on the racetrack throughout the season. Next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Jeb Burton's 2022 Ergodyne scheme that we're going to see this weekend at Las Vegas. I think this paint scheme's okay. It's not my favorite Jeb Burton scheme I've ever seen. I think it's an okay paint scheme. I'm just not overall the biggest fan of it, but it's cool to see that Ergodyne is stepping up and sponsoring Jeb Burton this weekend. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Chris Wright's 2022 iHeartRadio Shocker Hitch scheme that we're going to see this weekend at Las Vegas. Very cool to see the iHeartRadio stepping up once again and sponsoring Chris Wright, and it's cool to see that Shocker Hitch is also going to step up and sponsor Chris Wright this year. I think that's awesome. Great to see that new sponsor coming to work with Chris Wright this weekend. Next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Garrett Smithley's 2022 Trophy Hunt Tracker scheme that we're going to see for a couple races this season. Really cool. Love this paint scheme. Love the red. I think they did a really good job. Sponsorization's in a good place, and I'm looking forward to see this paint scheme out on the racetrack for a couple races this season. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ricky Stenhouse Jr.'s 2022 Sunny D scheme that we're going to see this weekend at Las Vegas and a couple other races. I love this paint scheme. I'm not always a big fan of the number being moved forward, but I think it actually works on this car. They do a good job with sponsorization and sponsor placement. Great job on this paint scheme. I think they did an awesome job, and I'm looking forward to see this paint scheme out on the racetrack this weekend. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Joey Logano's 2022 Pennzoil scheme that we're going to see this weekend at Las Vegas. Of course, Joey Logano tends to run a different paint scheme when we come to Las Vegas compared to any other track. Of course, his Pennzoil is sponsoring the weekend. This paint scheme is pretty cool in my opinion. I think it's better than some of his Shell Pennzoil schemes that he's had so far. Sponsorization's in a good position, and I'm looking forward to see his paint scheme out on the racetrack this weekend at Las Vegas. Next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Riley Herbst's 2020 Circa Sports scheme that we're going to see this weekend at Las Vegas. It's pretty cool seeing Circa Sports is sponsoring Riley Herbst. Not as big fan of the driver, but I think it's cool that Circa Sports is stepping up to plate and sponsoring Riley Herbst this weekend. I like this paint scheme a lot. I'm looking forward to seeing it on racetrack this weekend at Las Vegas. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Chris Buescher's 2020 Wyndham Reward scheme that we're going to see this weekend at Las Vegas. Roush Finley Keselowski Racing has done an incredible job when it comes to their paint scheme department. I don't know who they've got designing these schemes, but they've done a really good job. I think it's an awesome looking paint scheme, and I'm looking forward to see his paint scheme out on the racetrack this weekend at Las Vegas. Next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Tyler Reddick's 2020 BetMGM scheme that we're going to see this weekend at Las Vegas in a couple of the races. Great to see that BetMGM is stepping up to the plate. I've not always been a big fan of this paint scheme, and I think it's not much better with the number moving forward. I think RSR's had some good paint schemes and some not so good paint schemes, and I'm kind of leaning toward to put this kind of in the not as good ones, but it is awesome, though, that BetMGM is stepping up to the plate and sponsoring him this weekend. That's really cool, to be honest with you. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Chase Briscoe's 2020 Ford Performance Racing School scheme that we're going to see in a couple races this season, including at Las Vegas. This paint scheme's all right in my opinion. I'm not a big fan of the red number. I'm not usually a fan of when numbers are red. It's not one of my favorite colors when it comes to on the number. I'm not overall big. I think his paint scheme looks cool other than that. I'm just not a big fan of the red number. I think a black number would have worked a lot better on this paint scheme. It's not too bad, but it's not amazing, to be honest with you. Next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Bubba Wallace's 2020 Dr. Pepper Cream Soda scheme that we're going to see this weekend at Las Vegas. I love this paint scheme. This is one of my favorite 2311 paint schemes I think I've seen so far as a fan. They do a good job with sponsor utilization. The colors work very, very well. It's a nice looking paint scheme, and I'm excited that Bubba Wallace has another sponsor that's willing to work with him this weekend here at Las Vegas. Next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ryan Truex's 2020 Toyota GR Super scheme that we're going to see this weekend at Las Vegas, as of course Ryan Truex will be driving for Joe Gibbs Racing this weekend. This is a good paint scheme in my opinion. It's a good sponsorization. It's good to see a Toyota GR Supra is stepping up to plate that sponsor Ryan Truex this weekend. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Todd Gilliland's 2022 Georgia Peanuts scheme that we're seeing for 2 races this season. I think also it's going to be sponsored maybe at Las Vegas, but I don't entirely remember. Great to see the Georgia Peanuts is stepping up to plate, sponsoring Todd Gilliland. It's a good paint scheme, and I'm looking forward to seeing it on the racetrack this weekend. And the final paint scheme we are taking a look at is BJ McLeod's 2020 Filter Time scheme that we are going to see this weekend at Las Vegas. I love it a lot. I've been a big fan of the Filter Time schemes throughout the years. This one is no exception. I think they did a really, really good job on it. It's a very solid paint scheme, and I'm looking forward to seeing it on the racetrack this weekend at Las Vegas. They did a really good job on this paint scheme, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about United Rentals. As was announced yesterday, that United Rentals is going to become a primary sponsor for Ryan Preece for 3 Truck Series races, 1 Xfinity Series race, and 1 Cup Series race. Now, we've already seen the truck paint scheme already revealed, but we don't know what races that they are going to sponsor for the Xfinity Series and the Cup Series as well. United Rentals, of course, has sponsored Austin Hill, so maybe they're looking maybe in the future moving Austin Hill over in the future. But I think this is really cool that United Rentals is stepping up and sponsoring Ryan Preece, especially since in the future it's likely that Ryan Preece is going to go into SHR's team. I think that it's good to have him prepared and get him some experience. So I'm very happy to see this for sure, and I'm glad to see the United Rentals is stepping up to the plate, and they are sponsoring. Very happy about that for sure. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Marcus Allen. As Marcus Allen is going to be giving the command for the Cup Series race at Las Vegas to give the command to start engines. This will be the 3rd football legend that has already called the 3rd straight race. We had it for the Daytona 500. I think we had Charlie Woodson call it. And for the last race in Las Vegas, we had Matthew Stafford and Andrew Whitworth call it. And now you have Marcus Allen, who is a Pro Football Hall of Famer, who is going to be calling, who's going to be giving the command to start engines. Very cool to see this, and I'm glad they're trying to give energy and pump up the Las Vegas crowd. We've seen really good crowds for both races, so I'm very happy to see that Marcus Allen is coming in and going to be giving the command this weekend. And now we're going to jump on to the next story as we're unfortunately taking this episode to a very sour note, as unfortunately it was announced a couple days ago that Danny Ongais unfortunately passed away. Danny Ongais competed in 11 Indianapolis 500s and was one of the drivers who won a ton of kart races back in the 70s and 80s. He never won the Indianapolis 500, but he competed in many Indianapolis 500s and is a legend to the kart world and the Indy racing world. My prayers and condolences do go out to his family at this time, and it's really unfortunate what has happened. My prayers and condolences do go out to his family at this time. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about top 10s. Now, this is a very interesting stat that was posted by Joseph Wrigley, who currently, I believe, works at TobyChristie.com. And he says that through the first 2 NASCAR Cup Series races, 19 drivers have scored a top 10. Only 1 driver so far has scored 2 top 10s, and that's Eric Almirola, who scored a 5th place finish in the Daytona 500 and a 6th place finish this past weekend at Auto Club. If I'm not mistaken, that's where he finished. This is the first time that has happened in almost 50 years. The last time that happened was in 1973. Now, of course, there's a couple drivers who could have gotten top 10s for the second time. Kyle Busch, who had multiple issues, almost got a top 10, and Chase Elliott was on the verge of getting a top 10 as well. But it's so nuts and crazy the fact, and it shows that, one, there is a ton of parity in the field right now. We have not seen this much parity in the field in years. So I think that's absolutely crazy, the fact that we are seeing, so many people, so many drivers getting top 10s. Now, I think as the season progresses, that parity is going to go away, but I'm not sure how long it's going to take. It might take longer this time around compared to other times where it might take a little bit longer for the parity to show up. So that's really exciting news, and the fact that we've had so many people, so many drivers finishing in the top 10, I think is absolutely nuts and absolutely crazy. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Jeff Gluck's poll. Now, Jeff Gluck, we all know, who always does a poll after every single Cup Series race that concludes. And on his poll, he had a record number of people vote. 36,000 plus people voted on this poll. Like I said, that is the record for the Jeff Gluck poll. And the Auto Club poll scored like 36,000 votes, and 91.5% of the votes said yes to the race, meaning that only 8.5% said no. That means I think around 33,000 and 34,000 people said yes, and about 2,000 and 3,000 people said no. And of course, I don't know why people said no. I think a lot of that was, of course, a lot of the Chase Elliott fans. Now, there are Chase Elliott fans, of course, who did vote yes, and we're calling out some of the other Chase Elliott fans who did not vote yes. And I think one of the biggest reasons is the race was absolutely amazing. It was absolutely killer. If you watch that race and you tell me that race is bad, I don't know what kind of sport you're watching. We had the best Auto Club race in the history of that track. It was an incredible race, and I think the fact that it succeeded as well as it did shows that the race was really, really great. So in my opinion, I think we saw an amazing race take place. It was absolutely fun for the fans to watch, and it was absolutely incredible, and I really enjoyed that race, and I'm glad to see that the ratings for the poll did really, really great as well. We'll talk about the ratings in a little bit for the TV, but it was a great race, to be honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Tripp Bruce. As according to Casey Campbell, a friend of mine on Twitter, who's also a reporter, he reports that Tripp Bruce is going to be the crew chief for Todd Bodine this weekend at Las Vegas. Tripp Bruce has been working with Homer Friesen for the last couple of years. He's been a crew chief for many, many years. Up until about the end of last year, he was the crew chief for Stuart Friesen, but they changed things up in 2021. And now he'll be the crew chief on the second truck. Tripp Bruce is someone, like I said, who's been a crew chief for many, many years. And of course, we know that Todd Bodine is going to be returning for 7 races to get to 800 career starts in the NASCAR Camping World Truck Series. I think Tripp Bruce will do a really good job as a crew chief. I'm very excited to see that he's coming back to crew chief. I think that's awesome. And I'm looking forward to see what he can do in the truck series. And hopefully he can do a really good job helping him out. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Richard Childress. Now, Richard Childress was on Fox News earlier this morning, and he says that he is going to be offering up 1 million rounds of ammo to Ukraine to give to the Ukrainian people to fight back Russia. Now, for those of you who have been following the story, basically, unless you've been living under a rock, Russia invaded Ukraine about a week ago, and the Ukrainian people have been trying to fight back over the last week. And I know a lot of people are going to clown Richard Childress for this, but also Richard Childress is fighting for a really, really good cause right here. I think what he's doing here is absolutely amazing, and I think that I know it's funny. A lot of people are going to, because it's the most Richard Childress thing that could ever happen. But I think it's a great thing what he's doing right here. I think the fact that he's trying to support the Ukrainian people, I think is amazing and absolutely incredible. And I am very, very happy to see that he's going to be helping the Ukrainian people to try to help fight what's happening with Russia right now. I think Russia, unfortunately, will take over, unfortunately, but I think what Ukraine has done has been absolutely incredible. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Stan Mullis. As Stan Mullis will be driving a 13th for MBM Motorsports this weekend at Las Vegas. Stan Mullis has not competed in the NASCAR Xfinity Series since 2020. He did not race last year for MBM Motorsports. I'm not sure how many races he is going to run for MBM Motorsports, but let's be for real. His stats have not been very impressive. I think he's like a really old driver. I think he's like in his 50s right now, so that's probably why he's absolutely been struggling. But it is cool that he's coming back. Don't get me wrong. I'm just not really expecting him to do much this weekend. I don't think he's going to run well, and I think he unfortunately is going to struggle this weekend. I think he's going to struggle, and I don't think he's going to have a really good run this weekend, to be perfectly honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Race Team Alliance. Now, this is reported by Adam Stern on Monday evening, and he says that Race Team Alliance has launched a free 24/7 streaming channel for Racing America on connected TV platforms that will show 15 hours of live grassroots events a week. There will also be shoulder programming from Cup Series teams. For example, there could be a Penske Games show. I think this is really, really awesome. Now, I have my own personal opinions about the Race Team Alliance on a lot of things, but this is a really cool thing they're doing. They're showing a 24/7 programming for, like, local grassroots racing. I mean, I know that flow racing costs a ton of money, and a lot of people don't want to spend that. So what Race Team Alliance is doing here, they're trying to bring a compromise in so people can watch that. And I think with Race Team Alliance here, I think this is a really good programming, and I think that they're also getting into the world of streaming, which NASCAR in the future, especially with the new TV contract coming up really, really soon, they're going to have to get into the world of streaming and work on that. So I think that this is really, really awesome and really, really cool, and I'm glad to see that they're stepping up to the plate and they're working with these teams going forward. I think that's really, really awesome. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about CJ McLaughlin. As CJ McLaughlin is going to drive the 28 for RSS Racing this weekend at Las Vegas. CJ McLaughlin, the last time he raced, of course, a couple weeks ago at Daytona. And let's be for real, CJ McLaughlin absolutely struggled, and I'm not expecting much from CJ McLaughlin. Considering RSS Racing is a good team, it seems like when he gets in the car, he absolutely struggles. And that's no disrespect to CJ McLaughlin, but I really have not been impressed by the stats of CJ McLaughlin through the years. So I'm really not expecting much, and it's a shame I want him to do well, but I'm not really expecting much from CJ McLaughlin this weekend. Hopefully he proves me wrong, but honestly, I'm not expecting much from CJ McLaughlin this weekend. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Sieg. As Kyle Sieg is going to drive the 38 for RSS Racing this weekend at Las Vegas. I'm not sure how many races Kyle Sieg is planning to race at RSS Racing. Of course, the younger brother of Ryan Sieg has been racing with the team for many, many years. But Kyle Sieg is coming off of a top 20 finish at Auto Club Speedway after basically not really being able to qualify late in the qualifying session. He bounced back to a really strong run and got a top 20 finish. Kyle Sieg is a young driver. I think he's my age, if I'm not mistaken. He's 21 or 22-year-old driver, and a driver that does have a lot of potential and a lot of talent. I think Kyle Sieg could get a top 20 this weekend. I might end up being wrong, but I think Kyle Sieg does have a good shot to get a really good run this weekend at Las Vegas. Good luck to him. I hope he does really, really well this weekend. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Brennan Poole. As Brennan Poole is going to drive the 46 for Glory to God Racing this weekend at Las Vegas. Now, Brennan Poole, of course, made his first attempt in Xfinity Series in first attempt in Xfinity Series since around 2017 or 2018. Last weekend, he did unfortunately fail to qualify for Mari Carmen Racing, but now he'll be attempting to qualify in the 46 car. Now, he will have to basically beat one car to be able to make it into the show because only the top 31 get in, and one driver is going to go home since there's 37 trucks that will be competing this weekend. I think Brennan Poole will actually make it. I think, unfortunately, Matt Jaskall's the one who's unfortunately going to get eliminated for making the race. I think Brennan Poole is actually going to make the show, but he's probably going to finish last. I really don't expect much from Brennan Poole this weekend. I really don't think he's going to do well, but I think it's cool to see that he at least is going to come back and race, and glad to see that Brennan Poole at least is making some starts. It's a shame he's not in a good car. I think he absolutely deserves to be in a good car, but it is what it is, and I do hope in the future that Brennan Poole gets to have a good opportunity in the future, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about the MAV TV ARCA broadcast lineup. As the ARCA broadcast lineup for the MAV TV team has been announced, and there are some really notable faces that are coming back to MAV TV and coming back to broadcasting. Krista Voda Kelly, also known as Krista Voda, Jim Trado will be in the booth, and Mike Massaro is going to be on pit road. Krista Voda, the last time we saw her, I believe, was in 2020. She was not on the broadcast booth last year for NBC. She left the broadcast booth. She will have an all-female broadcast for all years. She'll be the first female MAV TV lead broadcast. Of course, Jamie Little is, of course, covering right now all of the ARCA broadcasts for Fox. She'll be leading the broadcast. Krista Voda, I think, has done an incredible job when she's worked on networks. I think she'll do a really good job. And also Jim Trado, I think he does a really good job with the MAV TV broadcast as well. Mike Massaro, the last time he was was working as a pit reporter was around 2016 or 2017. He's someone that I've absolutely missed working in our sport. So I'm very happy to see he's coming back to work at ARCA. I would love him to come back and work as a pit reporter, especially on the NBC. I think it brings a lot of personality and a lot of excitement. I'm glad he's coming back to do some racing, and maybe in the future we'll see Mike Massaro come back to NASCAR. I doubt it, but I'd like to see Mike Massaro get an opportunity to come back in the future, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the St. Pete Grand Prix TV ratings. Now, according to Adam Stern, NBC earned a 0.89 rating and 1.405 million viewers for Sunday's St. Petersburg Grand Prix. This is the most watched IndyCar season opener since 2011, which got 1.84 million viewers, which was on ABC. IndyCar is definitely on an upbringing right now. It's really on an upswing when it comes to their popularity. I believe this is the most, and by the way, this is the most watched IndyCar, like I said, most watched IndyCar season opener since 2011. Like I said, there's definitely a lot of reasons behind why IndyCar is up. Of course, you have Romain Grosjean, who's full-time at IndyCar right now. You have Jimmy Johnson, who's over there. But you also have IndyCar, which has a lot of really talented drivers. And I know that their social media game is not the most on point, but they are really good when it comes to that. And their Peacock numbers actually are pretty good as well. They're doing really good when it comes to Peacock. More people watching Peacock than ever when it comes to IndyCar. And of course, I know that they don't promote as much when it comes to their events, but IndyCar has done something really good. And one, they have an organic product that's been absolutely fun to watch, and a lot of the drivers coming in. And not to mention, we saw Scott McLaughlin, who I think is a really popular New Zealander or Australian driver. He's someone that is going out there and contending and winning races and got his first career IndyCar win, which is really, really popular with the fans, and it's got a great personality as well. And that's another thing. IndyCar has a lot of awesome and incredible personalities, which is helping the sport boom and grow. You don't think that's one of the big reasons? Because I think that's absolutely one of the big reasons why IndyCar is having a massive, massive boom right now. So I think that's so awesome and so incredible that we get to see incredible ratings from St. Pete GP. I think IndyCar is on an upbringing right now and really is on an upswing when it comes to their popularity, and I'm happy for the futures. I think it's really, really awesome, really, really cool, and I'm glad to see that things are going really, really well for IndyCar at the moment. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Henderson Racing. As Henderson Racing, the rest of their 2022 schedule was revealed by Parker Kligerman, who's going to drive all these races for Henderson Racing. So the rest of the races that they are going to run, they will race at COTA, then they'll race at Spring Martinsville, then they'll race at Bristol Dirt later in the year, then they'll race at Darlington, then Charlotte, then they'll race at Sonoma, then Nashville, then they'll race at Mid-Ohio, then they'll race at Lucas Oil Racing, which is Indianapolis Raceway Park, then they'll race at Bristol later in the year, then they'll race at Talladega, and their final race is going to be at Homestead Miami Speedway. So Henderson Racing is running, I think, around 13 of the 23 races, which includes Daytona. So they're running more races, I think, this year than last year. So they are running a majority of the schedule. And the reason they're not running full-time, they're doing something very similar to, I don't remember the driver's name in the Wheel and Modified Tour, but they're doing something very similar where they're going out there and they're trying to go out there and compete for races and race victories. And I think that's really, really smart, especially for a small team, because if they try to run the whole season, they would probably struggle. So what they're doing here, they have a really good and a really sick and awesome strategy here too. So I think what they're doing is absolutely incredible. I think Parker will compete for some top 5s and some top 10s. Plus, like I said, Parker Kligerman's a really, really good and a really incredible driver. So I think that they will be a very competitive team. And I think we'll see some really awesome and some great things for Henderson Racing this year. They almost won the Truck Series opener. Parker Kligerman's a great driver. I hope he runs some Cup Series races too if Grand Brothers Racing shows up. But I think Henderson Racing, they've got a really good schedule going for them, and I love that they are going to run those races here, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about SS Greenlight Racing. As well, they were having an interview. Bobby Dowder, the owner of SS Greenlight Racing, basically was having an interview with a buddy of mine on Twitter, Casey Campbell, and he revealed some details about who will be driving the cars. So, Cole Custer's next race with this team, we will be in the 07 once again. We'll be at Circuit of the Americas on March 19th. And then Chase Briscoe is actually going to drive the 07 car at the Indianapolis Road Course. Now, like I said, this past weekend, they got their first career victory in the NASCAR Xfinity Series as a team with Cole Custer driving the car. Yes, it is an SHR prepared car. So, of course, they were able to perform very, very well with the car. That being said, though, SS Greenlight Racing is a team that I think is on the upswing right now. They've had a lot of good performances. Yes, I know that one of their cars failed to qualify with Joe Graf Jr., but I think that both these drivers will do very, very well. And having both these guys come in and race with SS Greenlight Racing, I think is really, really awesome. And like I said, having both these guys in the series, I think is really, really cool, and I do hope that they can both contend. I think they will contend for the victories. I think they will, and I think we'll see some really good stuff come out of them here. So very happy to see that for sure, and I'm glad to see that those are both of them are going to race there. I think that's really awesome, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Reese Hasemans. As was announced yesterday, the Reese Hasemans is going to drive the 33 for Ram Brothers Racing this weekend at Las Vegas. Reese Hasemans, of course, driver for the Hasenberg team in the Cup Series, which of course has support from the Ram Brothers organization. And Reese Hasemans has driven for this team in the past, including in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. Reese Hasemans, I think, is a very talented driver. Of course, the Whelen Euro Series champion, I think, back in 2020, and has had a lot of success in that series. Hasn't as much success in the Cup Series, but he will be also making his NASCAR Cup Series debut at Circuit of Americas in about 2 or 3 weeks from now. I think Reese Hasemans is going to do a really, really good job in the NASCAR Truck Series. I mean, I don't expect the truck to really contend. I think they'll make the show. I think they absolutely will. But I do think that Reese Hasemans will do a really good job in his truck. I'm very excited to see that he's back in the Truck Series. I think he'll do a really good job. And I'm very excited to see that Reese Hasemans is going to be in the NASCAR Camp Pro Truck Series in the 33 for Ram Brothers. I think he's going to do a really awesome job, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about some penalties that were announced yesterday. This was also reported by multiple reporters that Seth Barber, Jordan Osenake, and Tanner Andrews are been suspended for 4 races for the wheel coming off at Auto Club, which of course are people who work with Todd Gillen. Tough break for Todd Gillen right here. Of course, all these are crew members. If you watch the NASCAR Cup Series Cup Series broadcast, you probably saw and noticed that basically they talked about Todd Gillen had lost the wheel on pit road. I don't know if it was on the car or not, but NASCAR did have to retrieve it. So NASCAR has made a massive, massive announcement for penalties, and they will all be gone for 4 weeks. Tough break here for Todd Gillen because he is a rookie, and I think that it's really unfortunate to see that he's not going to have his crew that he's been working with. It's unfortunate to see that he is not going to have the crew that he's working to start this year, especially is someone who can be a really good coach for him, who's been the team for many, many years. It's definitely really, really unfortunate. I think NASCAR should be looking at maybe cutting on some of these penalties. I think some of these penalties are really, really strict NASCAR has. I understand why they have these penalties, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, I think some of these penalties are very, very strict, and I do hope that they maybe can appeal. I'm not sure if they're going to, but I think maybe they can go ahead and maybe try to appeal these penalties, to be honest with you. Now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the FIA. As they announced yesterday, the FIA has announced Russian and Belarusian drivers have to be a neutral Formula One flag. They can compete in the Formula One, but they will not have a Russian flag. They will instead have a neutral F1 flag, which I think is a good decision. I don't think those drivers should be affected. But there is more to this story that meets the eye. So just this morning, about an hour ago, I think about an hour or two ago, the UK announced that they are basically going to be banning any driver that is a Russian or Belarusian, that they cannot compete in Formula One, which affects Nikita Mazepin. And very shortly here, and according to Andrew Benson, it's also reported by Adam Stern just a few minutes ago, it was just reported that they are expected to sever their ties with Nikita Mazepin. Now, Nikita Mazepin has been driving for Haas last year and absolutely struggled. Now, there's a big story behind Nikita Mazepin and why I'm actually happy he will most likely be gone and another driver's coming in. Nikita Mazepin has been involved in some very serious and very bad situations. Nikita Mazepin, of course, had a video came out where basically was doing something really, really bad to a woman. He also, I believe, got arrested in a nightclub, was in a fight in a nightclub. And his dad, of course, is on the oligarchy of the Russian government, and they have it really, really good. Now, also the story falls that a sponsor that he had, the Yerkele sponsorship, basically got dropped and basically left Haas, and they're very, very likely to drop Nikita Mazepin. Now, who is going to replace him in Haas? There's only 2 drivers, I think, that comes to mind. The first one, and this is the most likely one, is Pietro Fittipaldi, who is a Haas reserve driver. I think Pietro is a talented driver. I know his IndyCar stats really are not that great, but he also is technically an American driver, too. I know he's Brazilian, but he's also technically an American driver, too. So technically, we have an American driver racing in Formula One, even though he is Brazilian. He would be the first driver to be considered. The other driver that's also being talked about and considered, I've heard, is Oscar Piastri. Oscar Piastri, I believe, won the F2 championship last year. I wasn't paying attention much to Formula 2, but I believe that he was the one who won the Formula 2 championship last year, so he's another driver that I consider. If I had to choose, I'd go Piastri, but I think they're going to go with Pietro Fittipaldi. I think Pietro is a very talented driver. The situation sucks for Nikita in some ways, but honestly, Nikita's in a good position in his life, so I don't really feel sorry for Nikita. I really don't, in my opinion, if he loses rights. He's done a lot of bad things, and Nikita Mazepin is very likely to be announced out of Formula 1 here very, very shortly. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch. As Kyle Busch revealed on his website the races that he will run in the NASCAR Camping World Truck Series. The 5 races he's going to run, of course, he's going to be running this weekend in the 51 truck at Las Vegas. Then he's going to be racing at Circuit of Americas on March 19th. Then he'll be racing at Martinsville on April 9th or 10th. Then he'll be racing at Charlotte on May 27th. And then his final race is going to take place at Sonoma on June 6th. Or is taking place around June 7th or June 8th. I don't remember exactly what day, but he'll be racing at Sonoma as well later in the year. Now, this definitely is the most interesting schedule that Kyle Busch has had since he started doing the 5-race schedule where he could run. This is definitely the most interesting schedule he's had because you've got a short track, 1.5 miles. You got 1 or 2 1/2 miles. You have a short track in here, and you have 2 road courses, which I like the schedule Kyle Busch is going to run. I would expect that Kyle Busch is probably going to win all 5 of these races, unfortunately, including this weekend. Again, I mean, Kyle Busch said that if he doesn't run the truck series, the band truck cup guys run the truck races, he would basically go ahead and just shut his team down and wouldn't run it. So you have to let Kyle Busch, unfortunately, race in the series. Even if you agree with it or not, you do have to let Kyle Busch race in the NASCAR Camping World Truck Series. I think Kyle Busch won all 5 races. Again, he's going to, of course, have competition for John Hernimich, I guess some of those guys that are racing in the series, and maybe even, of course, Ryan Priestwell, who's going to be racing at Las Vegas. So I think Kyle Busch will do really, really good, and I think he'll probably, unfortunately, win all 5 races, which is a detriment to the fans, unfortunately. But I think we're going to see Kyle Busch, unfortunately, win all 5 of those races. Again, I think the fans won't be very happy about that, but he's probably going to win all 5 races. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Joey Logano and Matt Kenseth. Now, if you watched the NASCAR on Fox broadcast this past Sunday, Matt Kenseth interviewed Joey Logano at the end of stage 2, and Matt Kenseth said, "Hey, Joey Logano, this is your old nemesis." I don't remember exactly what he said, but he said, "Hey, Joey Logano, this is an old friend that you basically raced against. How you doing?" And he got a copy, and Joey Logano basically, some people thought Joey said, "Hey, old friend." He said, he said, "Hey, prick." But Joey Logano did clarify in Sirius and NASCAR Radio. He was on the morning drive with Pete Pasone, and I think it was Pete Pasone, and he says that he called Matt Kenseth a friend and not prick after stage 2 on the NASCAR on Fox broadcast. Now, of course, Joey Logano and Matt Kenseth have a very long history against each other. Remember, back in 2015, he and Matt Kenseth got into controversy after Joey Logano got into the back of Matt Kenseth at Kansas. Then Matt Kenseth paid back to him in 2015 at Martinsville, and then in 2016 at Talladega, we saw Matt Kenseth not very happy with Joey Logano after basically forcing Matt Kenseth below the yellow line, and that really is what caused Matt Kenseth to unfortunately get involved in that wreck. I thought he said friend too. I know some people thought he said prick because, again, these two have a long history against each other. But I really believe he did say, I don't think he said prick. I think he said old friend. I think it's definitely funny. Don't get me wrong. If he had called Matt Kenseth a prick, I think that would have gotten a lot more headlines in tradition. But I believe that he said old friend. I don't think he said prick. So I think that's good that he clarified that. I think that's a good call and a great decision. And it's good to see that he went ahead and clarified that, because I think he needed to clarify that, because if he didn't, I think a lot of people would not have been very happy with Joey Logano, to be honest with you. I think it would have been funny, but I think a lot of people would have been not happy with Joey Logano in that situation. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Greg Biffle. As Greg Biffle is back this weekend, he'll be driving to 44 for NY Racing this weekend at Las Vegas. He's got a really awesome paint scheme that he's going to be running. I think it's going to be FAMU, which is at FAMU University, which is a part of the HBCU universities, which, of course, John Cohen went to, I think, FAMU or Brandenburg University, which I think is another Florida college. He will have that, I believe, as a sponsor this weekend as well. Now, Greg Biffle made his first Cup Series start a couple weeks ago at Daytona 500, and he did say that he would like to run a majority of races in the Cup Series this year. Now, of course, Greg Biffle is going to be competing in all the races in the SRX season. We'll be talking about the SRX here very, very shortly. Now, I do not expect, though, that Greg Biffle is going to be very competitive. I expect that NY Racing, unfortunately, is going to finish last or near the back of the field, unless they do have a lot of pace. You really don't know, because, again, they were actually pretty competitive in the field in the 500, but unfortunately, they had a field issue, which made them end up finishing 36th. But the fact that Greg Biffle is already going to run more races this year than we thought he was going to run. A lot of people thought they were only going to show up for the Daytona 500. The fact, though, that he is going to be with NY Racing once again this weekend, I think is absolutely awesome. And I hope Greg Biffle does really, really well this weekend. I want him to get maybe a top 30. I know that's going to be really tough at NY Racing, but just the fact that they are showing up more races here than we initially thought, and at least giving us more than a 36-car field, I think is definitely a really good thing, and I'm very happy to see that Gray Biffle is going to be competing this weekend in the NASCAR Cup Series once again. I think he's going to be very, very competitive. I'm very excited to see that. And once again, I'm really happy to say that we're going to see Gray Biffle compete once again. I think he'll be pretty competitive, and I'm excited to see what Gray Biffle can do this weekend. To be honest with you, I think he could do really well. We'll have to wait to see what happens, what Gray Biffle can do this weekend in the Cup Series. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the Auto Club Speedway TV ratings. Now, reported by Adam Stern, Fox earned a 2.61 rating and 4.570 million viewers for the Wise Power 400 Auto Club. By far the most watched sport event of the weekend, but down from the second point series in recent years. 2021 Daytona Road Course had 4.75 million, which is basically a drop of 150,000 from 2021. And Las Vegas in 2020 got 5.5 million viewers. Now, like I said, it got 4.57 million viewers coverage. This was the most watched sporting event of the weekend. The Utah Jazz versus the Suns got a 2.737 million viewers. The Honda Classic, which was basically the PGA golf tournament, that got 2.571 million viewers. The 76ers versus the New York Knicks, that got 2.38 million viewers. And then the fifth biggest event was Kentucky versus the Razorbacks. I think that was either basically was a college basketball game, which got 2.361 million viewers. There's definitely some positives and negatives here when it comes to the TV ratings. The good news is it was the most watched sporting event of weekend, and it was over 4.57 million viewers. But there is negatives here because it was down 150,000 viewers. And what's really crazy is these ratings are going down despite the fact that people are going out to these races. If you look at the size of the crowds, the crowd sizes have absolutely been incredible, and we've seen some amazing racing. Now, I do think there's a couple factors into that. One thing I did see someone bring up is the fact that a lot of people are watching a lot of the coverage for the Ukraine versus Russia war right now. That could actually be a big factor in that. But one of the big factors that I think that's causing these ratings to not be as good is there's not a lot of promotion in marketing. One thing NASCAR, I think, has really struggled, especially after the 500 and the Clash, and why the Clash gained a lot is because they marketed the race very, very well. I have not seen a lot of really, really great marketing for NASCAR, unfortunately. I really have not seen a lot of amazing marketing that NASCAR has really put on right here. And in one of the biggest things you have to do is not only market your drivers, but you have to market these races as well. And Fox has not done a really, really good job. They did a good job with the Clash, and they've had, I think, a really good broadcast this past weekend with Matt Kenseth. But again, they're not marketing these races very, very well. And I do think another factor is these races are a lot longer. Now, I'm not saying that I disagree, that I agree that they should shorten the races, but I think that a lot of these NASCAR races, if you want fans to stay, look at all the other sports and how they're staying up. A lot of those events, especially in IndyCar events, they're 2 hours long, and look at the growth of IndyCar. Look at Formula 1. Their races are not much longer than 2 hours usually, besides maybe like the Indy 500, maybe Monaco. You don't see races last a lot longer than 2 hours in IndyCar, and you don't see a lot of races last long in there. NASCAR races go 3.5 hours and 4 hours long. Like, I don't mind races being long, but I think for NASCAR's growth, they're going to have to, in the future, look at shortening races, and marketing your events is very, very important. Now, I'm also a little shocked too. Ratings were up considering the Bubba Wallace documentary came out, which, by the way, if you've not watched it, you need to go check that out. That's a great documentary. But I think that's another big factor is the documentary came out, and I'm surprised no one really watched it as much. And now we might get some fans from the MLB lockout because, of course, the MLB had a massive lockout, and they're not going to be having the first 2 weeks. Maybe we'll get some fans from that. Maybe we'll get some fans from other sports. But to be honest with you, NASCAR's just got a lot of work to do. Now, as the season progresses, at least we're up from last year. At least we're not really terribly down. We're probably not going to be as bad as 2021. Let's be honest. I think our ratings will actually be better than 2021 because we got more races on broadcast. And I think that's one thing, biggest reason we're talking about these ratings as much is because of the TV contracts that are coming up really, really soon. These TV contracts are super important. They are very, very important for the future of NASCAR. So that's why we're talking about the ratings. They're not bad, but they're not amazing, to be honest with you, and they do need to continue to improve because I think that if the sport wants to continue to grow and succeed, these ratings have to absolutely improve, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the first of 3 major stories of today's episode as we are talking about practice. Now, NASCAR there's a lot of rumors going on inside the industry right now. The NASCAR is looking at lengthening the length of practice sessions. Now, this is according to the Door Bumper Clear Pockets, and this also corresponds to another individual named Daniel Vining, and other individuals have been saying in the garage that they're looking at lengthening the length of practice sessions. Now, how long are practice sessions going to be? That's one thing to be determined. Right now, NASCAR's current format is very, very confusing. Most races only have 15 to 20 minutes of practice. There's 2 sets of groups that go out. And then for the qualifying sessions, they have them set up in 2 different groups for a knockout-style format where the top 5 from each of those groups go in there. In my opinion, I still say this. I think especially, there's a couple reasons I want to say this. Number one, practice needs to be lengthened. Drivers have been complaining about the length of practice. Practice needs to be lengthened from 20 minutes. It needs to be lengthened to a 50-minute practice session, but everyone goes on the track. You don't have 2 separate groups. You have 1 group that goes out. I think that I do actually like the practice qualifying at the same time. Make 1 long happy hour session. That's 45 to 50 minutes, 1 long practice session, because we don't need 2 or 3 practice sessions, but lengthen practice to be 45 to 50 minutes, a happy hour session. Also, let teams adjust on these cars. Let them make adjustments. Let them make some more adjustments than they do, because that's what practice should be about, is letting these teams make adjustments, see who is the best. Next thing, qualifying. I like the knockout style format, but I like the way the Xfinity Series does it. I think the top 10 overall, not the top 5 from each group. I think it should be 1 round where everyone goes at once, and then you get the top 10 from that, go to the next round. I think that would be a really good style of knockout qualifying, and I think fans will be a lot happier with that. I'm not an overall big fan of the 2 rounds of the 2 groups qualifying. I think that's something that does need to change. I do like some of the things about the practice form, because don't get me wrong, I'm happy practice coming back. But I think especially with the new car, the length of practice needs to be extended. I think practice has been way too short. I think it needs to be extended to 1 long happy hour session. Because like I said, we don't need 2 to 3 hours of practice. We don't need 2 or 3 practice sessions. We need 1 practice session. That's 45 to 50 minutes. And I think fans overall will be a lot more happy with that than what they've seen. I think a lot of fans will be happier with that, and I think that'll be a great decision if they do 1 session. Now, I'm not sure how long it will be, because NASCAR will probably make a decision in the future, along with the tire situation, because that's something that they're going to have to fix here very, very soon. But I think practice sessions need to be extended. There is no excuse for the length of practice being 20, 30 minutes. It needs to be 1 45-minute practice session, and it needs to be where teams can adjust the cars as well, in my opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next major story of today's episode, as we are talking about the sponsorship model. Now, this is reported by Adam Stern, I believe, on Tuesday morning. And it says, according to him, Michael Jordan's advisor, Curtis Polk, says that he and Jordan believe that NASCAR teams would benefit from an NBA-like model that is less reliant on sponsorship and more on media dollars. So that's what we've been working on a lot with Denny Hamlin. Now, of course, Michael Jordan is one of the owners of 23XI Racing, along with Denny Hamlin. And Michael Jordan, of course, played in the NBA, one of the greatest basketball players of all time. And what they're talking about right here is they're talking about letting the drivers and the teams get a lot more piece of the pie when it comes to the TV deals. You look at a TV deal right now, I believe that right now tracks get 55 or 65% of the cuts. I think the teams get 20% or 25% of that. I think NASCAR gets 10% or 15% of that cut. What they're talking about here is the sponsorship model that NASCAR has right now is not working very, very well. A lot of things and downside stuff, that's one thing that has to change, is the sponsorship model for fans as well. That's one thing that absolutely has to change. And like I said, I think the sponsorship model absolutely needs to change right here, because, again, I think especially when it comes to TV deals, drivers should be able to get a lot more money. Because, again, look at the sponsorship model. NASCAR teams are very reliant on sponsorship. It's not like NBA where they have to worry as much about sponsors. It's not like NHL. It's not like the MLB. It's not like the NFL. It's not like all those other sports that have to deal as much with sponsorships. NASCAR and other motorsports as well, and even F1 and IndyCar don't have to rely on as much. NASCAR is a sport that relies on sponsorship dollars. And I think that sponsorship dollars, like I said, are very, very important for these teams to stay afloat and keep afloat. And they want them to change this, because the more money these teams get, the better it's going to be for these teams, especially for some of the smaller teams. And I think this also comes back a little bit to that parity as well in the field. We are seeing more drivers teams wanting to call out NASCAR for the media dollars, because the TV deal right now, how it works, they don't get as much money right now, so they want to change in the sponsorship model. I know a lot of people say, well, why are we doing the NBA? They want to go to China and stuff. They want to support China. That's not what they're talking about. They want the sponsorship model to change, and Michael Jordan is a businessman. He knows how everything works. Of course, he owns the Jordan brand for shoes, and look how successful that has been when it comes to their sponsorship model. He owns an NBA team. Yes, not a very successful NBA team, but they get a lot of sponsorship for that as well. They want an NBA-style model, and they want that to be very, very successful. And I think NASCAR is trying to look for the future. And Denny Hamlin and Michael Jordan, those guys, are really, really smart when it comes to the side of business. And again, they want the sponsorship model change. Again, I've been saying that they need to change the sponsorship model. A lot of NASCAR fans want the sponsorship model to change, and they want this. They really want it to change. Absolutely. I think that if they change it, I think fans overall are going to be a lot happier with NASCAR. That's one thing that will be a big benefit right there. And it needs to change. The sponsorship model NASCAR has right now is not working as much. We're seeing a lot of teams shut down. They're not getting as much piece of pie with the charter system. And that's another thing, too. I think the charter system does have a big factor when it comes to that sponsorship model. And that's another thing that has changed is the sponsorship model again, that's something that absolutely needs to change when it comes to sponsorship model. And Michael said Michael Jordan is a guy who's a businessman, and 2311, their new team, yes, they're part of the Race Team Alliance, which, of course, that's a part of the charter system, who brought up the charter system. But that's one thing that needs to change. The sponsorship model absolutely needs to change, and it absolutely needs to be fixed in the futures. I think if the sport wants to see long-term, you've got to change the sponsorship model. No excuses, no ifs or buts. Change sponsorship models. I think fans will be a lot happier, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we are talking about the SRX. Now, the SRX for the last couple weeks has been announcing drivers left and right, and they just announced multiple other drivers that will be racing the SRX. There have been a lot of questions about Tony Stewart, if he was coming back to the SRX. Well, it was confirmed today that Tony Stewart is going to be competing in all 6 races and be looking to defend his title in the SRX this season. Hailie Deegan is going to compete in 2 SRX races here. She'll race at the second, I think the opener at Stafford. I think Stafford opens up season, if I'm not mistaken. I remember it's either Five Flags or Stafford that opens up season. But she will compete at Stafford, an I-55 raceway in Peabody, Missouri, which is not far from where I live. That's where she will compete. And Matt Kenseth, yes, heard that right. Matt Kenseth is going to join the SRX for 3 races. He will compete at Nashville, then he'll compete at I-55 Raceway, and then he'll compete at Sharon Speedway. First, let's talk about Tony Stewart. Tony Stewart, of course, the defending champion of the original SRX. They don't really care about the championship as much about the races. But Tony Stewart will be looking to defend his championship. I think he got 1 or 2 wins last year in the SRX and went on to win the championship hands down over Ernie Francis Jr. and the rest of the competition. And looking at Tony Stewart's chances, I absolutely think that he will do very, very good. And I think he will contend for the championship once again. He's got more competition this year. There's some good drivers joining. You've got Justin Newgarden coming in for a few races. You got Ryan Hunter-Reay joining for the whole season. I think he'll be very, very competitive. And also, I think Ryan Newman is also going to be very competitive as well. But I think Tony Stewart, he's got a good shot to defend his championship. I think he actually will win the championship. Second person, Hailie Deegan. Happy to see that she's coming back. She was really impressive in the SRX. I think there was a race or two where she was really, really competitive and was really, really fast. I know that her truck stats have not been the most impressive, but you look at how popular she is. She brings a lot of young butts, and they're looking for a lot of younger people to get in SRX. That's why they're bringing Joseph Newgarden and Ryan Hunter-Reay in. They have a lot of younger audiences as well. And she, of course, has a very big social media presence. So, of course, it's super important to bring her out to the racetrack. So you'll get a lot of fans who are fans of her out to the racetrack as well. I think she'll be someone that's really, really fun and to be in a series. And I think she'll be very competitive with her youth. I think she'll absolutely be very competitive and will contend for victories in both races. And, of course, I-55 is a dirt track. And I'm telling you, she was really good at the dirt races last year, especially the Knoxville race she ran. She was very competitive in that. So I think she'll be very, very competitive. And finally, Matt Kenseth. What to say about Matt Kenseth? Matt Kenseth has been getting back involved in racing. He's looking to run a couple races, including Slinger Nationals as well. And he also was in the broadcast booth for Fox for NASCAR and did an incredible job with the Fox broadcast booth. But not only that, having him compete, I think he'll be very competitive. Of course, running the 3 races, he'll be very, very competitive because he has been racing, and he's someone I think that still has a lot of talent. I know that his last year in the Cup Series in 2020 wasn't great, but of course he's a Cup Series champion, 2003 NASCAR Cup Series champion, and he's someone that has had a lot of success and a future NASCAR Hall of Famer as well. Having him join the SRX is absolutely fun to watch. And you know that certain people like Eric Esep, who's a big fan of Matt Kenseth, you know for a fact that he is going to show up and be there at the SRX races. I am super pumped up and super happy to see these drivers coming back. Looking at the expectations, I think all 3 can win the races that they run. I think Tony Stewart, of course, I think will go back-to-back championship. I think Hailie Deegan, I circle her contending for the I-55 race. I think she's got a shot at winning that. And I think if any of these drivers win with the SRX, I think it'll be impressive. And it's just going to bring new fans and new light into the sport. So overall, like I said, I'm super pumped up and super excited to see if these 3 drivers are coming back to the SRX because the SRX needs to bring new blood in there. They've got a lot of good drivers, don't get me wrong. They've got Greg Biffle, who's been racing the Cup Series very recently. They've got Michael Waltrip, who's been working with Fox and stuff. He's in there. And there's other drivers, I think, that are also in the future looking at it. I look at some other drivers maybe they could get in the future. Chase Elliott's another one I think that absolutely needs to come back and run the SRX. He won the season finale at National Fairgrounds last year. He needs to be someone that comes back. I want to see Kyle Larson run too. Kyle Larson has had a lot of success in NASCAR Cup Series. He just won the most recent race at Auto Club. And of course, there's a lot of talk next year he could run the Indy 500. Kyle Larson would be a great driver. Jeff Gordon would be a great contender as well. Jeff Gordon, who hasn't been in the car for the last couple of years, but he's someone I think that would be very competitive. There's a lot of talk maybe he could run the Truck Series race in the future, but I think he'd be another driver. But back to Matt Kenseth, man. Having him in this series, I think is absolutely great and absolutely fun. And I'm really looking forward to this SRX season. I think it's going to be fun this year. And there's a lot of other drivers that I think are going to get announced in the future as well. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm glad to see those drivers are going to be racing in the SRX once again this season. So, anyway, that is for today's Law NASCAR and Motorsports video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel to be notified when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let's get below over that and comment your thoughts on today's video. What are your thoughts about Matt Kenseth joining the SRX? Let me know in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about all the other stories we discussed here today on the channel? Let me know in the comments below. Tomorrow on my channel, we're going to have race picks for the Pennzoil 400 at Las Vegas. I've got a lot of picks and probably one of my longer picks videos you're going to see on the channel. So check that out tomorrow. So you got a lot of picks we'll be making. So anyway, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's video. And I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.